give me a brief history of the territory bands, and what was your inspiration to start?
So here's the story. Territory bands were bands that played what they called the territories, like the North, the Midwest territories. There were Midwest territory bands, and I'm not like a historian. I would call. In fact, the New York Times referred to me as a rogue historian of jazz.
I like that. That's
yeah,
a
rogue historian of jazz. Yes, because I actually play it. But you know, in the East Coast, in the Gulf Coast, in the West Coast, you had kind of, it was a little more city or ports, you know, port towns, different kind of society. In the Midwest was a little kind of different society, and so that could be like St. Louis and Kansas City and Tulsa, but I think even like Richmond, Virginia, that was considered like territory band stuff. And anyway, so it was this kind of music, and it was what music was what people listened to. That's what music used to be. It wasn't like a product. It was like something that people went and they'd listen to, like it was music, and danced to it. So you're playing for dancing and listening, and you're also the loudest thing. Like there's no like amplifying yet.
Sure.
So like trumpet, like, you know, I have to tell people, like, people don't realize, I don't think they do. They think Benny Goodman, right? They think like, you know, old people in like suits and stuff like that. Gene Maxwell used to tell me, man, you gotta understand, like everyone had a jug under their seat. There were all these beautiful chicks in the audience. Like, I would say they were probably the Nirvana of their time, like the loudest white dudes.
Sure. Yeah. Benny Goodman's band.
Yeah, like,
Yeah,
but we don't
sure.
think of him as that.
Yeah,
You don't think of Benny Goodman as Nirvana.
Right.
But in his time, that's what it was, this experience of loud, kind of beat-oriented music played by like young white people.
Sure.
With a lot of testosterone.
Yeah.
People dancing. I mean, there were some crazy musicians in Benny Goodman's band.
Oh, yeah.
The original ones, you know? And
it reminds me of I talked to my grandfather about this. He lived to be 95, and he would go see Fletcher Henderson's band. With a 17-year-old Ella Fitzgerald.
No, Fletcher Henderson. See, I didn't even know that.
Yep.
I know she's saying with Chick Webb's band, but she's saying
maybe that's Chick Webb's band.
right.
That's
That
what I'm
was
thinking of. You're right.
Right.
You're right.
So that was the famous thing. In fact, someone told me someone just did a documentary about this.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, and I'll tell you that. Yeah.
But he told me I was like, "How'd your parents like jazz music?" He's like, "They hated it."
Oh yeah, it was like Nirvana. It was so audacious. You have to think of the time, like think of the relative sound and feeling of 1937. And then this music just like roaring out. You know, it's always been the music roaring out.
Yeah.
And I think that roar, like that was about the Lounge Lizards, because I've been reading John Lurie's book. The Lounge Lizards had that roar. There's something about that when you get that roar going. And, you know, those acoustic instruments, they were the ones that could make the roar.
Sure.
We were roaring, man.
Yeah. And it had to have been, I mean, that was part of putting together a big band, too, is that you have that instrument, you can get that energy out of that.
Okay, so this goes back to, where did we start?
Keep going.
Nope.
We started at
Territory bands.
Territory Band.
Okay, so this is all coming from territory bands. So these are bands, and oftentimes they were like 2 trumpets, a violin, a trombone, very rarely 2 trombones, 3 reeds, 2 reeds, and all the reeds played different reeds, and there was usually a bass or a tuba, and a banjo guitar, and a lot of those, and a piano player, and that was this kind of music. And you know, historically, it's all connected to whatever you want to call it, Jelly Roll Morton and the blues and all that stuff. I mean, Count Basie had that big hit with the Jelly Roll song. You know, and a certain kind of rhythm, they call it the Midwest rhythm. I mean, they had a very, you know, it was exemplified by, you know, the Count Basie band, but, you know, it was a certain kind of beat, and guys like Hot Lips Page, and so that's the territory bands, and they weren't as formulated as the East Coast bands, which were slicker, the Chicago bands, you know, city bands. These were like a little, and then also the music maybe a little more oriented towards blues and what we would call now either Tin Pan Alley or American Songbook, you know what I'm saying? Because to get less of that influence, I'd say, because they're not there in the midst of that, you know. And And some super sophisticated writing, though. I mean, Andy Kirk and Mary Lou Williams was in that band. But, people call it riff-based music. They would say, because I think a lot of that music wasn't written.
Sure.
Or there could be 8 written bars, or more or less, but that music like developed on stage for people dancing and for songs happening. And so anyway, that's what territory bands were.
What era is this?
This is, again, I would say, like, I'm just, this is rogue historian. This isn't like official sanctioned stuff. 28 to 36.
Okay.
37. And also, see, the music wasn't formalized as much. And there was still like a real, a big ragtime kind of influence, just structurally with a song, oftentimes, the major to minor to blues thing, like,
sure.
or minor to major to blues, stop time, these kind of little, go into a trio section, all these devices, little 2-bar chromatic tags between things, like these little devices. Nothing was formalized.
Yeah.
People were just throwing things around in the songs.
Yeah.
So it sounded like a march, it might be a march, but then someone's like playing like some blues in the background. That could be a section of it.
Sure.
A lot of that stuff, as the whole kind of classic big band, really, not that he was the only guy, but Cy Oliver, like this idea of trumpets, trombones, saxophones, the 3 distinct sections. That came later. That was not necessarily what territory bands did.
Sure.
But it had that feeling of that music.
Yeah.
But it was more kind of gushy.
Yeah, they were working it out. And for that reason, you get some kind of experimental stuff. I feel the same way about like the Hot 5s and Hot 7s recordings. Like, it sounds like, okay, anything can happen.
Right.
We can do whatever we want.
Which always freaks me out about people playing that stuff written, unless you were saying like, it's like I'm performing it as classical music. Like this is classical music.
We're replicating this.
But to call it jazz and do that, it's like, I mean, I understand why you would do that because it sounds just like jazz.
Right.
A little cleaner because you already know what's going to happen.
Sure. But it's a different thing.
Yeah, well, of course it's a different thing. You already know what's going to happen.
Right.
Of course, those guys, they just did it. And then once you know what's going to happen, it's something else. I'm not saying it's not jazz, but it's not.
Right. Sure.